The morning sun slanted through the classroom blinds at Lincoln Ridge Middle School, painting soft stripes across rows of worn wooden desks. The low hum of pre-algebra instruction barely reached the girl seated in the third row, second seat from the window. Her name was Imani Blake, and on that morning, as on so many others, she was drawing quietly in the margins of her notebook. Her pencil moved with delicate precision, shading the outstretched wing of a bird mid-flight, capturing a sense of motion and fragility that even her teachers might have envied, if any of them had looked. Imani's braids swung forward as she leaned into her sketch. Long, intricate, and tied with subtle gold-threaded beads, the braids framed her face like armor. They were beautiful, but to her, they were more than style. They were safe. Beneath them lay the secret she guarded daily. Alopecia areata, a condition she'd been diagnosed with at age 9. It had started as a few patches, barely noticeable. But as months passed, the hair loss spread, patchy and unpredictable, leaving her scalp sensitive and bare in places no child wanted exposed. Her mother, Commander Serena Blake, a decorated officer in the U.S. Navy, had ensured Imani's medical exemption forms were filed with the school long before deployment. The braids weren't for vanity, they were protection, physically, emotionally, psychologically. But none of that mattered to Ms. Heather Crowley. The teacher's voice snapped through the room like a rubber band. "Miss Blake," she said sharply. Imani's pencil froze. Her head lifted slowly, eyes wide and unsure. "That doesn't look like math," Ms. Crowley said, heels tapping with a purpose as she crossed the room. She reached down and snatched the notebook from Imani's desk before she could close it. The class fell still. Ms. Crowley flipped through the pages, her thin lips curving into something not quite a smile. "Birds, flowers, and this. Whatever this is," she said, holding up a page where Imani had sketched a portrait. Soft eyes, crown of curls, stars in the background. "Lovely," Miss Crowley said coolly. "But I suppose that's why your grades are slipping. You're too busy being the next Picasso to care about your multiplication tables." Imani's grades weren't slipping. She was top of the class in every subject, but she didn't correct her. Ms. Crowley wasn't finished. "And these braids," she said, letting her eyes travel deliberately across Imani's hair. "So elaborate, so excessive. Don't you think it's a bit much for school?" A few students shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. One or two glanced at Imani, then looked away. Only Tiana Rhodes, Imani's best friend since second grade, held her gaze. Steady, firm, supportive. Miss Crowley turned to the class. "This," she said, gesturing toward Imani, "is exactly why we need a stricter dress code. Too many distractions. Too little discipline." Imani's throat tightened. "My mother filed a medical form," she said softly. Miss Crowley didn't even blink. "Excuse me?" Imani repeated barely louder. "I have a medical condition. My mother filed an exemption form." "Oh, I see," Ms. Crowley said, her tone laced with disbelief. "Of course you do. And I suppose your medical condition also explains why you're drawing instead of learning." Imani said nothing. "Front of the room," Ms. Crowley ordered. "Now." With the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on her, Imani stood slowly. Her braids swayed with each hesitant step toward the whiteboard. She stopped in front of the class, staring at a spot just below the clock, her jaw clenched. "These kinds of hairstyles," Ms. Crowley announced, circling her like a hawk, "violate our standards of neatness and uniformity. We don't allow hats, we don't allow hoods, and we certainly don't allow this." She gestured again to Imani's hair, the word "this" cutting deeper than anything else. Tiana raised her hand. "Ms. Crowley," she said cautiously, "Imani does have alopecia. Her mom's in the military. She told me they filed everything." "Enough," Ms. Crowley snapped. "This is between Imani and the school, not a debate." The class went silent. Ms. Crowley stepped back and folded her arms. "You have two options, Miss Blake," she said. You can remove those extensions now or you can go home. Imani's face paled. Please, I can't. Then I'll help you, Miss Crowley said. Let's visit the nurse's office. I'm sure she'll be happy to assist. As Ms. Crowley placed a firm hand on Imani's arm and led her toward the door, Tiana reached into her backpack without thinking. Her fingers found her phone. She hit record. The hallway outside the nurse's office echoed with each step, sharper than they should have sounded on a soft tile floor. Imani Blake walked stiffly, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of her silence was too heavy for her 12-year-old frame. Her teacher, Ms. Heather Crowley, walked 2 paces behind her, clipboard in hand, jaw set like stone. To anyone watching, it looked procedural. 2 figures, a teacher escorting a student. But to Imani, it felt like being marched into something she couldn't yet name, but already feared. Inside the nurse's office, the overhead fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and orange peels. Nurse Kelly Moreno looked up from her desk, puzzled. Morning, Heather. Everything all right? No, Mrs. Crowley answered briskly. We have a dress code violation. Student refuses to comply. Nurse Moreno glanced at Imani, whose eyes were already shimmering with tears she refused to shed. The nurse's gaze softened. Sweetheart, can you tell me what's going on? Imani opened her mouth, but no words came. She's wearing extensions, elaborate ones, Ms. Crowley continued. It's against handbook policy. And when I confronted her, she claimed she had a medical condition. Imani finally spoke. I do, Ms. Crowley cut in. She says her mother filed an exemption. I checked her file. There's nothing documented. That's not true, Imani whispered. Nurse Moreno stood slowly and walked to the filing cabinet behind her. Let me check myself, she said, her voice neutral but not unfriendly. Miss Crowley folded her arms. I've already looked. Nothing specific about hair. The nurse pulled the file, brows furrowing as she flipped through it. She found a medical letter from the naval base, stamped and signed. A postscript attached. Hair loss may require protective styling. Extensions approved under medical discretion. Right here, Moreno said, lifting the form. It's dated last semester. Ms. Crowley didn't blink. Then why wasn't it updated this term? Because nothing changed, Moreno replied, and this is valid for the year. Crowley stepped closer. With all due respect, Kelly, we can't allow students to look however they want just because they waive a doctor's note. These policies exist for a reason. The nurse's voice grew colder, and so do federal laws protecting children with medical conditions. Then let's verify it the hard way, Crowley snapped, her voice rising. Take the extensions out. If she has nothing to hide, let's see what she's hiding. Imani's breath caught. No, please, don't. I'll do it myself, Crowley said, turning to the nurse. Do you have clippers? Clippers? Moreno recoiled. Heather, she's a child. She's a student refusing to comply, Crowley insisted. And if her mother wants to contest it, she can do so after she returns from whatever military mission she's on. She's a commander, Imani said, her voice breaking for the first time. She's in Kuwait, and she trusted this school. Ms. Crowley didn't pause. Sit her down. For one awful moment, Nurse Moreno hesitated. The protocol wasn't clear. The policy manual said little about hair and less about exceptions. She looked at the girl's face, frozen in horror. She looked at the teacher, unyielding, and she made the wrong choice. I'll do it carefully, she said numbly, retrieving the clippers from a locked drawer. The mechanical buzz sliced through the air. A cold, high-pitched whine like the sound of a distant alarm. Imani tried to stand. No, please. I'll call my dad. But Ms. Crowley held her shoulders. You brought this on yourself, young lady. And the first braid fell. Then another. Then the layer beneath, the patchy, tender scalp hidden for years, was laid bare in seconds. Tears streamed down Imani's cheeks as the hair hit the floor in clumps. Nurse Moreno's hands trembled as she worked. Ms. Crowley stood beside her, arms folded, satisfaction flickering behind her eyes like a match struck in shadow. By the time it was over, Imani looked into the mirror and saw someone else entirely. A stranger. Her breath hitched, but she didn't cry out loud. She just whispered, "She's going to find out. My mom. She's going to find out." Ms. Crowley scoffed. "And what exactly is she going to do? March in here with medals and demand a redo?" Imani didn't answer. She didn't need to, because 1,000 miles away, across time zones and oceans, a military-grade satellite pinged in Kuwait, and Commander Serena Blake's secure phone buzzed. The video had reached her inbox, and the moment she pressed play, everything changed. Half a world away, the desert sun blazed mercilessly over the beige tents of Camp Hadir, the U.S. military outpost stationed in Kuwait. Inside the command center, Commander Serena Blake stood beside a satellite briefing screen, her face impassive, her voice sharp with clipped authority. Logistics confirmed. Civilian evac routes. Her phone buzzed once. Then again, 2 encrypted notifications, back to back. Serena glanced at the screen. It was rare for anyone to contact her mid-mission. Her fingers moved with practiced precision as she unlocked the secure message. The subject line alone made her breath catch. Imani, urgent, video attached. The message was short. No introduction, no explanation, only a single line. "You need to see what they did." Serena tapped the screen. The first frame showed a dimly lit nurse's office. Her daughter, Iman, was seated in a vinyl chair, clippers whirring inches from her head. A woman, her teacher, was standing off to the soim, arms crossed, watching. The second frame showed the first braid fall. By the third, Serena had stopped breathing. Silence stretched around her like a vice. The buzz of the war room faded. The drone of communication chatter dimmed until all she could hear was the unbearable sound of her daughter whispering, "My mom's going to find out." And then Serena moved. In less than 10 minutes, she had handed command to her deputy, printed the school medical release form she had filed months ago, submitted a request for emergency leave, and arranged for a U.S. military transport to fly her back to the States. As she stepped into the transport vehicle, one thought burned through her mind like a live wire. This isn't about policy. This is about punishment. Back in Oak Ridge, Georgia, the school district issued its first public statement by late afternoon. A disciplinary misunderstanding occurred involving a student and a faculty member regarding appearance standards. All parties are safe. We take such matters seriously and are reviewing procedures. No mention of the Clippers, no mention of Imani's medical condition, just bureaucratic fog. That evening, Marcus Blake, Imani's father and a high school science teacher, stood in their quiet kitchen staring at a plate of untouched dinner. Imani sat at the table across from him, hood pulled low over her head. She still hadn't spoken more than 10 words since the incident. "I filed everything," Marcus murmured, as much to himself as to her. "They knew. Your mom and I, we submitted every damn paper they asked for." Imani didn't respond. She just stared into the steam rising from her untouched soup. Upstairs in her room, her sketchbook lay open, every page erased, as if her creativity had fled along with her hair. Across the city, Ms. Heather Crowley poured herself a glass of wine, watching her television as her name trended on social media. "Typical overreaction," she muttered. "These people always play the victim." She didn't notice the glare of the screen freeze mid-refresh. She didn't hear the knock at the door. At 3:42 a.m., Serena Blake stepped off the tarmac at Atlanta International, still in full uniform. Her boots struck the ground with quiet purpose. She didn't cry, didn't rage, but her eyes were steel. By the time she entered the house at 4:15, Imani was sitting in the living room, awake but silent. Serena walked in, paused, then slowly knelt before her daughter. The little girl's eyes brimmed with recognition, shame, and something else, hope. Without a word, Imani pulled off her hoodie. Serena's breath trembled. She reached forward, placed her palm gently against Imani's bare scalp, and whispered, "They don't get to decide who you are." Then, standing up, her voice sharpened, "Get dressed, baby. We're going to your school." By 7:52 a.m., the front steps of Cypress Hill Middle School looked exactly as they always did. Students milling about, teachers corralling the energy of adolescence, the soft, mechanical murmur of buses easing into their morning rhythm. But then, a silence fell, not gradually, instantly. Commander Serena Blake stepped onto campus in full uniform, medals glinting in the sun, her boots crisp against the concrete. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She simply moved forward like someone who had walked into combat zones and expected no less from this moment. At the front desk, the secretary, Janet Mitchell, usually all smiles, fumbled to her feet. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "Yes," Serena said, voice calm but unflinching. "Where is Principal Hadley?" The woman stammered, He's in a meeting." "Then interrupt him," Serena replied. "Tell him Commander Blake is here regarding the assault on my daughter. Imani Blake, 7th grade. Behind the desk, the printer paused mid-copy. A teacher who had come to pick up classroom keys suddenly forgot what room number they were asking for. Someone pressed the front office intercom and cut it just as quickly. They could all feel it. This wasn't a meeting anymore. This was an intervention. Inside the principal's office, Mark Hadley adjusted his tie 3 times in 1 minute. He'd been expecting a call, a conference, maybe even a lawyer. He had not expected the mother to walk in wearing a silver star and combat ribbon. And she hadn't come alone. Serena entered with a folder in her left hand and Imani at her side, her daughter's head now covered with a soft indigo wrap. Marcus followed silently, a steadying presence. "Commander Blake," Principal Hadley said, rising with forced cheer. "I'm glad we could—" "Sit," Serena said. He sat. She placed the folder on his desk and opened it. Inside, copies of the medical exemption, dated emails confirming submission, signed acknowledgement by school staff, and a certified letter from Imani's pediatric dermatologist. "All filed, all ignored," Serena said. Principal Hadley cleared his throat. "We understand this has been a distressing event. The teacher involved has already been given a 1-day suspension while we review." "A 1-day suspension?" Marcus spoke for the first time. "You let someone shave a child's head against her will, with no medical expertise, no parental consent, and she gets a vacation day?" Hadley's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I want every step of this incident documented," Serena said. "I want the nurse's logs, the video surveillance from the nurse's office, and a formal written explanation from Ms. Crowley as to why she overrode a medically documented exception." "I'm not sure if we have surveillance in that specific area," Hadley said weakly. "Check again," Serena said. "And if it's been deleted, that will be a separate criminal matter." She placed a second envelope on his desk. "This is a formal complaint filed with the U.S. Department of Education, the State Board, and the Office for Civil Rights. You will also be receiving subpoenas from our attorney, Grace Yamada." Hadley blinked. "Is that necessary?" Serena stood slowly. Her voice didn't rise. "It didn't have to. You shaved my daughter's identity off her head, and then tried to call it a procedure. If you don't think this is necessary, then maybe you've forgotten what your job is supposed to be." As she turned to leave, Imani paused at the door. She didn't speak. She simply looked at the man behind the desk and held his gaze. She didn't flinch, didn't cry, just watched him, the way a child watches a lie struggle to stand in the face of truth. Outside the school, as the Blakes stepped onto the sidewalk, a local reporter, tipped off by a community member, raised a microphone. "Commander Blake, what would you say to the parents watching this?" Serena looked into the camera. Then she said with quiet power, You don't need a uniform to fight for your child, but you do need resolve. And silence is not protection, it's permission. Imani reached for her mother's hand, and this time she didn't hide behind her hoodie. The school board meeting that Thursday night was not supposed to be public, but word had spread like wildfire. Parents filled the auditorium at Cypress Hill Unified District, some standing in the aisles, others leaning against walls. Teachers sat clumped together, unsure of where to place their loyalty. Students had even started a quiet protest, placing purple hair wraps on their lockers in solidarity with Imani. At the front table, Principal Hadley looked like a man trying not to sweat through his shirt. On his left sat Miss Crowley, her face pale, her hands folded tightly. On his right, Superintendent Mary Delgado, a sharp-eyed woman brought in only hours before from the district office. In the third row, Imani sat with her parents. She was still wearing the indigo wrap, but her body no longer curled in on itself. She sat straight, W like her mother. A soft hush rippled through the room as Serena Blake stood and walked to the microphone. She didn't bring a folder tonight. She brought a voice. "My name is Commander Serena Blake," she began, "and I've served this country for over 17 years. But tonight I'm not standing here as a soldier. I'm standing here as a mother. As the mother of a girl whose trust in the school system was shaved away, strand by strand, by a woman who was supposed to protect her." The room was silent. "My daughter Imani has alopecia, a medical condition you knew about. You had it in your records. You had the documentation. You had the responsibility. And yet," she paused, steadying her voice, "you let someone drag her to a nurse's office and forcibly remove a part of her identity." She turned slightly toward the board. "And then you tried to call it a misunderstanding." A murmur of agreement rose from the audience. "I'm not here for apologies," Serena said, her tone low but razor sharp. "I'm here for accountability." Behind her, Imani stood up quietly and walked forward. No one had expected it. Even Serena looked surprised. Imani didn't speak at first. She just stood at the mic, looking out at the rows of adults who had spent the last week either dismissing or debating her pain. "My name is Imani Blake," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I'm 12 and I love my hair." The room stilled. "I didn't love it because it was perfect. I loved it because I built it, piece by piece, over something I didn't choose. My braids weren't distraction. They were armor." She looked directly at Ms. Crowley. "You didn't take it because of the dress code. You took it because you didn't like seeing me strong." Crowley shifted, but said nothing. Imani turned back to the crowd. "But I'm still here, and I'm not covering myself because I'm ashamed. I'm covering myself because I decide what I share now, not you." When she stepped down, the room erupted, not in chaos but in sustained applause, not loud and performative, but long, certain. By Monday, the school board had voted. Ms. Crowley was terminated. Principal Hadley received a formal reprimand and was placed on administrative leave pending further review. Nurse Elise, who had hesitated but ultimately complied, issued a public apology and stepped down voluntarily. But that wasn't the end. With the help of civil rights attorney Gracie Yamada, the Blakes filed a complaint that led to statewide policy reform on how schools handle medical exceptions and cultural expression. Imani became a quiet symbol of that movement. A month later, she returned to school, not in shame but with a small pin on her backpack that read, "This is my story. You don't get to erase it." And when she walked into math class for the first time, the teacher, the new one, Mr. Green, nodded at her gently and said, "Welcome back, Miss Blake. The board's yours." She didn't flinch. She sat, calmly, and took out her notebook. Moral of the story: there are moments when silence is survival, and others when breaking it is the only way to heal. Imani's story reminds us that the deepest cuts are not always visible. They come from the careless hands of power, from the systems that protect those who abuse them, and from the adults who look away. But they can be answered, not with rage, but with resolve, not with revenge, but with truth, and sometimes with the simple, unbreakable strength of a girl who chooses to stand.